Industry will adopt this technology one way or the other. The question is, how do they do it, and do they do it in a way where they are seeing it and studying it to the extent we are? So we have this really important industry program that is working towards the vision we see for human-centered AI, and it's been a really impactful program. We are working with a strong set of organizations, from retail to food and beverage to luxury goods to finance and tech.
A lot of these businesses are just seeing this field move so fast that they just want knowledge of what are the trade-offs of these different algorithms and how to do them responsibly.
It starts within our own research, and we take those same frameworks and teach industry how we are applying those frameworks, and working with them from a research perspective to executive education opportunities.
Our researchers are creating algorithms and models and ideas that are used by industry. We are also one of the leading benchmarks of today's large language models. That work is very trusted by people not only across industry but also across nonprofits and governments.
HI also looks at how the economy is going to change, which is a big question for everyone. Everyone has anxiety of, will my job be replaced? What will the new jobs be? Will the economy grow? One of the centers here at HI is this digital economy lab run by Professor Erik Brynjolfsson.
The reason we founded the Digital Economy Lab is that we saw a growing gap between the awesome improvements in the technology and the relatively slow changes, if any, in business organization, our institutions, and our economic understanding. We want to close that gap, and to that end, we have assembled some of the best minds on earth, attracted them here to Stanford, graduate students, professors, and other researchers to work on the problems, understand how is the economy going to be fundamentally different as AI becomes more and more powerful. We are going to prepare our society for this technological revolution that's coming. We're going to understand the economic institutions, the policies, the workforce needs that we should have in place. This is going to be something that leads to a healthier, wealthier, and happier society.
Our next sessions will focus on the implementation of AI in society at scale, asking the question, how do we augment the human experience? First up, you will hear from Erik Brynjolfsson in a fireside chat conversation with Jaime Teevan. Erik Brynjolfsson is the director of the Stanford Digital Economy Lab, the Jerry Yang and Akiko Yamazaki professor, and a senior fellow at Stanford High. His research explores the impact of digital technologies on the economy, focusing on productivity, employment, and income inequality. Brynjolfsson's insights have been influential in understanding how AI and other digital innovations are transforming economic landscapes and societal structures. Jaime Teevan is the chief scientist and technical fellow at Microsoft Research. Her research focuses on productivity and collaborative work technologies, exploring how AI can enhance workplace efficiency and innovation. Teevan's work aims to develop tools that improve how people interact with technology and each other in professional environments. Please join me in welcoming Erik and Jaime to the stage.
So Jaime, I overheard you just now talking to Russ Altman saying you felt like we were living through history. And I know you've been studying computers and AI since you were an undergrad. But about a year and a half ago, you had a conversation with Satya Nadella and Sam Altman that you say sort of kind of changed your perspective on a lot of things. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, we were joking about the black and white videos and how much that was like already putting us in history. Yeah, I mean, I think many of us in this room have been involved with AI for a long time and can like feel that difference. Now, I actually like have a little, I take notes just because it feels so much like at some point we're gonna look back on this and talk with our grandkids about what's going on.
I know, I've got my laptop here, but I'm just using it to be able to take notes better, yeah.
Yeah, no, and so like, and I remember like when that feeling really struck. It was this meeting that you were mentioning that we've chatted about where It was the first time that I saw GPT-4. At the time, I had been playing around with 3.5. This was sort of end of summer, a little over a year and a half ago. And so went on campus to meet with Sam and Kevin, our CTO, and Satya to get a sense. And I knew actually going in that my job was going to be to take GPT-4 and integrate it into the Microsoft products. And honestly, I was like, oh, I'm kind of getting set up to like fail. Like, I have been trying, my job had been to try and integrate AI into our products for a long time. Like, you know, we have grammar check and all sorts of great ways that AI was showing up, but like in this sort of taking the foundation models and language models and really getting them in there. You know, it's hard. It's a hard job to do. And so I, you know, get into the room and start playing around with GPT-4. And, you know, the first couple of things that it does that is cool, like Sam takes a news article and gives it to the model and asks it to summarize it as a poem. Like, you're like, yeah, that's cute, but like everybody sees cool demos. But as an AI researcher, you know how to like poke at the holes and try and figure out what's going wrong. And that as I sat and like tried to break it and watched the way it was able to maintain context, the way it was able to balance, you know, different constraints in a reasonable way, it just was clear that this was gonna change the world. And actually, I was, afterwards I was driving home from that meeting, and I only live like two miles from campus, so very close, and I could not make it home. I had to pull over in this 7-Eleven parking lot, and I sat in my car, and I screamed. Because it was, you know, and it was just my whole worldview felt like it had changed. And actually, I realized too, like this was not gonna be a lot of work. This was like it was gonna be a different kind of work than I was expecting. It was gonna, you know, figuring, like I felt this real responsibility to figure out how to get this into people's hands and how to do it the right way.
Well, Microsoft has obviously leaned in really much. You have, and the whole team has, into the technology since then. And we've all played with ChatGPT and the other consumer products, but you've been doing a lot more thinking about how it can change the organization of work and change the way knowledge workers get things done and like you said, integrate with the Microsoft products. So tell us a little bit about how you see the nature of work changing. Yeah,
that's a great question. You know, there's sort of some obvious ways that AI is changing work and the sort of the ways that we're all looking for it to change. Like, and you see the early research supporting this, that generative AI can make us more efficient and faster at a lot of the tasks that sort of are in what's often called like inside the jagged frontier of what AI can do. You know, you want to write an email? Sure, I can help you write a more awesome email with AI. Do you want to take a news article and summarize it? We can help you do that more.
Got to read the email. I was using that feature, and then I used it a little bit too fast, too much, and some of my recipients were like, Erik, are you using Gen AI to write your emails? I was like, okay, I gotta, they could tell. Except,
actually, the latest models, like in the new, so you can actually now, generative AI has gotten to a point. So for you have been able to tell when it's generated with AI. It's actually, AI is now producing outcomes that are more human than humans. So like people might start thinking you're faking it when it's actually you.
Well, you got to kind of tune it to personalize it a little bit, because there are things that I just wouldn't say, and it has to learn that.
And match style and stuff, and so that's part of the big infrastructure. Actually, you talk about bringing AI to work. There's all this infrastructure that needs to happen. So there's one piece, and this was largely what even after GPT-4, like, and it exists and we're integrating it into our products, there's all this infrastructure that needs to take place in order to actually make it work? Like, how do you operate at a global scale? How do you, I've been hearing GPU questions for like 2 years now, so I've heard that come up over and over again. How do you give it access to a person's data so that you can personalize it to experiences in a way that is privacy preserving and matches customer expectations?
Yeah, well, on that topic, so there's a product, Microsoft Recall, which Erik Horowitz described to me like 6 months ago. He said that it would look at all of your messages, your research you're looking at, your web browsing, and then it would know much be able to personalize coaching for you and writing things. And he said that they were testing it, and after a couple of months, they said, okay, we got to take it away now. And people were like, no, we want to keep using it. But then, when it was announced, I heard in the news a few days ago, there's also kind of a backlash against all the privacy challenges around that. So talk about both the pluses and minuses of using all that data and some of the risks that creates and also some of the opportunities.
Yeah. I mean, and so it's a great question, Erik. It is, and this has come up throughout the morning as well, the importance of data. And this AI revolution that we're in right now is really changing the way we understand data. And so one of the things that's interesting about organizations is that they have, so the models are trained on generally world data, corporate that are available to all of us. And in that way, they reflect sort of general knowledge. But there's actually much more, orders of magnitude more data that exists sort of in our private spheres. And that's particularly interesting as an enterprise company. Microsoft generally helps large enterprises manage their data, create data, share data. And that data is really something that makes the business of work different in the context of generative AI. And as individuals too, we have important data, the data that we interact with all the time. And there's an opportunity to start thinking about how to do that and start thinking about what does it mean to be able to capture and use that. But of course, we are rethinking what data means and how we use it, how we value it, how it gets used.
I mean, is it stored locally? So suppose I activate Recall.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I can, but when you have something like that available, I would be worried about all my personal files going up into the cloud and Microsoft and whatever. Do you have it kept locally or is it
so
encrypted?
Recall specifically, and so this is a foundational thing that we as a company care a lot about is actually the protection of data. So Recall is a feature which captures information. It's a local Windows functionality. Nothing goes into the cloud. Everything's stored locally.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just more broadly, there's been a set of questions about all this data, the training data and the licensing deals. I'm seeing a lot of them. I think it's $250 million that OpenAI paid News Corp, and you've got. And when you're working with your enterprise customers, there must be some tricky property rights issues about how you can help them use that data to give them better answers, but also protect it.
Yeah, so and that is so there's a really important difference that you're sort of pushing at, which is the difference between the consumer space and the commercial space. And I think most of us in this room, sort of by default, are familiar with the consumer space. We're used to okay, yes, and that's sort of the way we think about things. I use a search engine, and my queries go into the cloud and get stored by whatever search engine I'm using. In a consumer context, in an enterprise context, it's actually quite different. We actually are just sort of curators of the data for our customers. That data is never actually ours. And so and that's actually one of the things that's really cool and the real opportunity with the way that we bring AI to people is helping organizations unlock the data that they have.
It's just so much more valuable now. There's so many things you can do with it, and we have to kind of think harder about how to manage it.
But it's true. The biggest we get a lot of questions from customers. The first one is how fast can we get on this and get more? And then the second one is how are you using my data? And people are, that is a top of mind question. Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about the way that work is changing. So the most common question I get, maybe you get a lot too, is what's going to happen to all the jobs? We're all going to be unemployed. And the technology right now is mostly being used to augment people. And I wrote article about the Turing trap and the benefits of augmenting versus trying to replace. I like the co-pilot phrasing that Microsoft is popularizing for a lot of different products. Tell us a little bit about that trade-off between augmenting versus automating, and how you think about that, where each of them is working best, and what you do to the extent you can to steer the way people use it.
Yeah. You know, a lot of, and this was sort of how we were talking about, like a lot of the early research is actually, in early ways people are thinking about using AI, is automation. It's sort of it's the uncreative uses of AI. It's like, okay, yes, write my email for me, read this document for me. It's that sort of thing, and that's great. In part because actually, as you start making those sorts of things more efficient, you free people up to be able to do other things in more interesting, creative ways. But I actually think that AI gets much more interesting when it starts not just helping you do what you want to do, but like helping you do things better and differently and in new ways. And I actually really challenge this community. And actually one of the things that's really special about HI is its focus on human AI interaction.
That's right.
Is really not just thinking about AI as a tool to obey us and sort of do what we tell it, but as a tool that challenges us or helps us think about things.
So what are some
in new
examples
ways.
of that, of the AI, augmenting or challenging or changing what we do as opposed to just automating what we're already doing?
Here's an example that I like and that I actually think is nice too, because it highlights a different aspect of AI in a business context as well. So one other difference about AI in a business context is we often think about it as a personal productivity tool, but in an organization, you're like, how do we work together better with people, and how do we get things done better? And so Teams Copilot is one of our most popular surfaces to be using Copilot in right now. Basically, Copilot can take a meeting that you attended or weren't able to attend, but were supposed to, and summarize that meeting. And in that way, that makes you more efficient. That's sort of this example of like, okay, I'm going to automate away the task of attending a meeting. And instead of going to the meeting,
go to 4 meetings simultaneously.
I can go to 4 meetings simultaneously and get the summary for all of them. And actually, there's very clear, like you can get all the key stuff out. You don't get this human interaction, though.
Who needs that?
No, but so this is the interesting thing. Actually, that human interaction matters a lot. And like we did a ton of research during the shift to online meetings and remote work during COVID on trying to understand how to support like being able to see the side of a person's head, or connect emotionally with people, and that matters a lot too. And so actually one of the ways that you can see AI show up in a meeting isn't just in this like have a more efficient meeting, but actually have a more interesting meeting. So in Teams there are suggested prompts that are like, what questions are unanswered? What hasn't been resolved?
Oh.
And like in real time, we can figure out the topics that we should have, and that actually came in part from integrating GPT-4 into our products. In those early days, there was not, so GPU access, we were trying to stand up just the infrastructure to be able to run this at all. And there were a lot of constraints on being able to. So almost nobody had access to the actual model, but I had this team of folks across all of our different, like across Word and Teams and Outlook and anything, trying to build GPT-4 into their products. So what I did was I set up a daily call where we would just get online together. I'd screen share, and we'd all just enter in different prompts to the model. And actually that process of kind of collaboratively talking with the model brought us a lot more new insight, and it allowed us to share that insight. And so like that really kind of inspired them to think about how we can use AI to make meetings cooler.
I like that. There's a lot that could be done there. It reminds me of the work I did back with Tom Malone. I think you were at MIT around then. And I think I have at least 2 customers for you already. So I was talking just before lunch with someone from a major consulting firm who wanted to use something like to help boards make better decisions, ask better questions. A lot of boards felt like they didn't ask the right questions at the right times when they should have, and this could kind of help them think through some of the issues that are in front of them. And then sort of a very different application last night, some of my student teams in my class were presenting projects and proposals, and one of them was to help interview your parents. I did this a few years ago. You guys should do it if you haven't already done it, about their childhoods and about how they grew up, and kind of get all that recorded. And I could see an engine like that helping to kind of get people to talk about things the right way. So it is kind of neat to get at all sorts of new kinds of issues. You said actually the first question that people asked you often was about how can we do this faster? And it seems to me like the technology is moving incredibly fast, but also I know from 20 years of my research that business adoption often is much, much slower. It can take years or even decades before you fulfill the promise of some of these amazing technologies that our very smart colleagues in computer science and AI are inventing. What are some of the things that could speed up the capturing the benefits of these technologies and bring the productivity gains? I have a bet with Bob Gordon that productivity is going to grow faster in the coming decade, and in order for that to happen, we can't just have cool technology. We have to actually have it changing the way people work. What do you or what we all do to speed up the adoption and transformation of businesses with these technologies? Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question. And we actually just released some research too that confirms what you're saying. 75% of people in organizations are using AI in a work context, but only 39% of business leaders actually have an AI strategy. So you actually, like organizations are, and even you were talking about boards, like actually a lot of leadership is slower than their employees to be doing, to be adopting. And it's actually really important for organizations to have AI strategies and be thinking about that. There's a bunch of different, from the short term to the long term, actually, like even just in the short term, the ability to creating space for people to be able to share how they're using AI is quite good. We've created... You mean like people in different companies saying, here's something that was successful, here's something that worked for us, here's something to avoid? And it's even like, it was talking about like getting on those calls and seeing what other people were doing. I would come away and have new ways that I would use it. Actually, prompting is really important for AI. You actually find a good, when you go to the academic conferences right now, a lot of the AI research is on prompt strategies, and that's actually because a good prompt strategy will improve outcomes by as much as like a larger model. So having a good prompt strategy, but these are weird prompt strategies too. Like you can be like, you tell the model, let's be creative and have fun, and you'll get better results when you when you interact with it. Take a deep breath. Think step by step. Right. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. One of the things that we're trying to do just in the short term is help support people prompt better, give them, help them see. And then also... That's a job that AI can do too, though, isn't it? That AI can write better prompts? Absolutely. No, and so that's exactly. So you start by helping people prompt better, but you can also do behind the scenes prompt rewriting. There's so much complex stuff that goes on to like sort of orchestrate and like get your prompt into the model in a useful way with all the right context and to produce what you see that comes out. It's kind of amazing. So we can both do it, but we can also teach people, and then we're also creating ways for people to share their favorite prompts, just as an example of like some of the short-term stuff that we can do. Those are What are some of the main barriers to people using the technology faster? What are the things that people should be looking for to overcome? I think a lot of it is sort of, this is just like human like nature. A lot of it is just creating the time to experiment and get things done. I often talk about how we all need to be scientists right now, and that ability to experiment, develop hypotheses, try things out, see what's working. And then actually to that point, like everybody in this room knows that science isn't just experimentation. It's also, the related work section is an important part of a paper. It's building on the state of the art, so taking the time to read and learn from others. It's also about sharing what you do, both so that others can build on it. So like I can tell you, oh yes, go say, take this step by step in your prompt and then you can do better, but also actually for validation so that people can challenge you and see what's going wrong.
So
Yeah.
I think that scientific approach is actually really useful.
So and we heard a little bit about that in the previous panel, but bringing that to business as well and having
Right.
kind of a more,
Yeah.
and even I think for identifying the opportunities, people can share anecdotes and examples, but you can also do a very data-driven approach. At the Digital Economy Lab, we have a task-based approach where we look at breaking occupations down into individual tasks. You can look at a couple 100,000 individual tasks and see where the technology is most suitable for each of those types of tasks, and then bring them back to the organization. Is like, what are the priorities you should be focusing on? So it can become much more kind of quantitative and data-driven.
Right.
Forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there some, people talk about some risks, like, bias and, the hallucination and the concerns about giving wrong answers, and there have been some embarrassing examples of that from different companies. What are the risks that you're most worried about that people aren't taking serious enough, or what do you think maybe the ones that are overblown?
Well, I mean, I think it's really important for us to be thinking about the risk. We started out talking about sort of the historical place that we are right now. Like, we are in the middle of something that's really big and important, and a really mind-blowing shift. And so we're responsible for thinking carefully about what we're creating. There's sort of the old school AI risks that I think of that we have a pretty good handle on. So bias and fairness tend to be sort of those old school ones that we can start thinking about.
We have a good handle on those?
What?
Tell us more about how we have a good handle on them. Yeah.
Oh, so we've done, there's been a fair amount of research there, and like, we know how to go, I think there's still a lot to be done, and there's, but we know how to create test sets and evaluate, and we know how to, be thoughtful about the data that we're training on in that context. And so I think that's an area. There are new risks, hallucination that sort of come to light that we think about a lot as well.
What are some of the ways that we can reduce hallucination? Or is that going to come naturally as the models get bigger and better? Is it inherent? Something else we need to do?
When you think about hallucination, I mean, so there's a whole range of things, and actually hallucination's not always like part of when you're trying to come up with new ideas and new ways of thinking, you're essentially asking the model to hallucinate. So like, one way to deal with hallucination is to think about the tasks you're using AI for.
So if you're using it for brainstorming, it's a feature.
It's an amazing for brainstorming.
Yeah.
Figuring
but if you
out.
want to get the exact, chemical, or the drug you should be taking today, that's not so good to be hallucinating.
And then there's a bunch of mitigations that you want to start thinking about. Like, one is the model's going to continue to get better. You can mitigate hallucination a lot by providing context. That's where that huge data corpus of data that we have is when you provide a lot of context, you all of a sudden can structure it. There's user interface interventions that you can do to make people slow down or stop. The model is actually quite good itself as well to like challenge you and think about.
RAG, connecting to.
Yep, and so the RAG is a great way to add additional context in there.
But I think your first point about people have to think about how they're using it. I think that's a common mistake, is that I think we've had a lot of experience with calculators or databases, and the stereotype was computers were very logical and precise and always gave you the exact answer. And trying to fit LLMs into that model, in a way, sells them short, because there's a lot of things they can do, but also can expose you to some really bad mistakes if you assume that they're going to have that kind of precision.
So I think you're exactly right that in many ways we are mapping large language models into metaphor, because that's what we have to do to understand something. You map it into a metaphor to be able to understand it, and they're very different. So one thing we will map them to is computing, and it's different to be able to express your intent and like tell a computer what you want to do. Like, it's foundationally a different way to interact with computing compared to pointing and clicking. But there are other things too. Actually, another metaphor that we map AI to is actually people, and we tend to think of it as like, okay, think of it as a human, and like, humans can make mistakes. I ask Erik for something, I'm not going to trust everything that he gives me. But it's actually, that metaphor breaks down as well. AI has different properties that are interesting. AI can operate at scale. So all of a sudden, if I want to know what somebody, if I want to know what somebody thinks of an email I've written, Like I could ask Erik for his input, or I can give the AI millions of different personas and get input and like at scale. And so you can start thinking about, how do you get collective intelligence? What does it mean for people to collaborate at a very vastly different scale?
I've used AI. I've used it to critique my papers. So one of the editors of a journal was complaining that it seemed like referees were using chatbots to write the reviews. But I started doing it to myself. I said, okay, critique my own paper, and it would give 5 critiques, and like the first 2 or 3, I'd be like, okay, yeah, I kind of knew that. That's and then maybe the 4th one would be completely idiotic, completely missed the point of the paper, and the 5th one would be like, oh, wait a minute, I hadn't thought of that. That's really interesting. So if you use it sort of with judgment, don't take it as the ground truth, but it sort of can be a very useful tool for getting different perspectives.
But it also helps people collaborate differently. So like imagine everybody in this room right now is having some thoughts on the conversation we're having right now. Imagine if we were able to capture the top takeaway or the top thinking and like pull that together. And like, this is easy. It's easy for the model to synthesize all that information. And we could throw up right now a takeaway from this whole group. And there's no doubt that like the collective intelligence of this room would bring us an entirely different perspective on this conversation. So that's what so the scale is one example. You were talking about time, basically. AI is always available. Like you have to wait to get reviews. Like, it's something to get it synchronously. It's legible. It's very interesting that you can go back and like adjust one little piece and try the whole thing again and see what's different. It's shareable. I have a conversation or context or a prompt that works really well. I can hand that over to you to use. So these are, when we think of it, I can't take Erik's brain and hand it to all of you. These are things that like fundamentally change the way that we're going to think about what we can get done. And so like it's useful to have metaphors, and then it's useful to start thinking about different what's broken about them.
So I think we're almost out of time. Let's just ask a question a little bit about the future, the near future, the middle future, the further future. Yesterday, I was reading something that your colleague Kevin Scott was saying about how GPT-4 was kind of like a smart high school student, like a high school senior or early college, but that the new models would be more like someone who was passing the PhD general exams. And I don't know what the model after that would be. But speculate a little bit, or maybe it's more than speculation, depending on what you've seen. Tell us what we can anticipate in the coming years, and both on the technology side, but also your expertise about how that's going to change the nature of work if we have models that are significantly more powerful than anything we see today.
Yeah, I mean the models are going to keep shocking us. I'm gonna have to scream in my car again. So we should expect continued innovation from the models. And I would say we have not even begun to see the impact that this current generation of models will have on work and how we get things done. Because there's so much integration required to sort of do all of it. How do you integrate with all the data? How do you do all the orchestration? How do you figure all of that out? It's a really exciting time. We are actually the question that I would want to ask for the collective intelligence. It would be really fun to get everybody's in this room's predictions for the future and see what that's like. But I just think we have such a responsibility. Like this group in this room has a responsibility for creating the future and for making it a future that we all want to live in.
Okay, well, thank you. That's a great point to end on. Thanks very much, Jaime.
Yeah, thank you.
Next on stage, you will continue to hear from experts whose research asks the question, how do we augment the human experience? Please join me in welcoming Russ Altman, who will be moderating this session's lightning talks. Russ Altman is the Kenneth Fong Professor of Bioengineering, Genetics, Medicine, Biomedical Data Science, and Computer Science at Stanford. As a senior fellow at Stanford High, his research applies AI to biomedical data, aiming to understand how drugs work and predicting adverse drug reactions. Altman's interdisciplinary approach bridges the gap between AI and healthcare, contributing to personalized medicine and improving patient outcomes. So please join me in welcoming Russ Altman to the stage.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that lovely introduction from the voice of God. This is the Lightning Talks section. The title, as you can see, is Implementation of AI in Society at Scale. How do we augment the human experience? This is incredibly important. We've just heard a little bit about these issues already, and we should be thinking about them more. The whole point is to make the dialogue about AI, about augmenting humans and making lives better. That's central to the human-centered AI effort. And so we have 3 speakers who will be telling us about 3 very different pieces of work that are all aimed towards augmentation and not replacement, for example. This is not only important in general, but I think it's important for the public to realize that this debate is something that they can take control of and they can guide with expectations of augmentation as the modal use of AI. So I'd first like to introduce our Curt Langlotz. He's a professor of radiology, medicine, and biomedical data science, the director of the Center for Artificial Intelligence in Medicine and Imaging, and he is an associate director of Stanford High. Thank you, Curt.
Thank you, Russ. It's a pleasure to be here to help celebrate the 5th anniversary of High. We started getting organized in our artificial intelligence efforts in the School of Medicine at the Amy Center about 5 years ago also, which has really been the beginning of a partnership that I'm superbly proud of between the medical school and the rest of the campus through High to develop AI in health at Stanford. We're looking forward to many more years together. There's nothing more inherently human-centered, I think, than using AI in healthcare, whether it's developing novel therapeutics for cancer or building an algorithm that might provide early detection of cancer on a CT of the chest. These all have profound impacts on both scientific discovery and clinical care. And so we really value the collaborations from the medical school, not just to computer science, School of Engineering, but to the ethicists, the legal scholars, the economists who help us develop and implement these technologies in a responsible way. Stanford has some unique strengths in this area. So we have, as you may know, our medical school is literally right across the street from the engineering school. So we have developed great collaborations there. Also, the hospital that lives there serves as a wonderful source of data that we use, keeping account of patient privacy, but we use as training data to develop these models, and can also serve as a kind of proving ground for the models that we build. So what I want to do this afternoon is just to give you 3 examples of the kinds of technologies that we've developed, and then to talk about something that we're very excited about that we're working on now for the future. So first, just want to show you this plot, which is the plot of the predicted versus actual survival of terminally ill patients. Physicians' predictions on the y-axis, actual life expectancy on the x-axis. And as you can see from all the dots above the diagonal line, physicians are really not very good at predicting this. They tend to overestimate life expectancy. And so we developed, a large team developed this algorithm which found patients who were near the end of life, who needed end-of-life advice and counseling. And this has now benefited thousands of patients at the hospital to have the kind of end of life that they prefer. Another example, on the left here is a CT of the chest. It's called a gated CT because we image the chest at the same point in the cardiac contraction. And what that does is it effectively freezes the appearance of the heart on the scan. And you see the 2 white dots there represent coronary calcium, which is a sign of coronary artery disease in that patient. We do about 2 million of those scans a year in the United States. On the right is the same patient imaged for a different purpose. It might have been for a pulmonary nodule or for pneumonia or for trauma. And for that reason, we don't gate the heart. And you can see that the heart is moving and the coronary calcium is smudged. And so we built an algorithm that could grade the coronary risk even on those routine scans. We do about 20 million of those a year. So now we're able to find 18 million patients in the country who have coronary artery disease who may not know it. We took this algorithm and wanted to study the effect it might have on patients. And so we did a randomized trial. Half the patients got a notification, a letter, with a picture of their calcium, and their referring primary care doctor also got a letter. And the other half got routine care. They just got their routine radiology report. And what we showed was that patients who were notified, the rate of statin use, which are these cholesterol-lowering drugs, went from about 7% to more than 50%. So this really has the opportunity to save many lives of patients who have underlying coronary artery disease by extracting information from images that we wouldn't normally extract. This algorithm now has been licensed to a startup. It's brought through the FDA and actually is being used at places like the Cleveland Clinic and the Hospital Corporation of America. Third example. A recent law called the Cures Act gives patients immediate digital access to their health information. So patients receive test results like this one. This is an MRI of the knee. And because these are written by radiologists for the physicians who have requested these studies, they contain terminology that people who go to medical school understand, but patients don't always understand. As I can tell you from my own family, I get a lot of questions, like what is a mild intrasubstance degeneration of the posterior horn of the medial meniscus? And so what we did is we built a technology that can extract concepts from these narrative reports and feed that to a language model, which then can explain it at a reading level that's appropriate for the patient in nice 3-sentence descriptions. And so we get these wonderful analogies like it's kind of like when your favorite pillow gets a little flat but still works fine. So this is a way that patients can better engage with their healthcare information using these new technologies. Okay, shift gears a little bit. I want to talk to you about the future and something that we're working on that we're very excited about, and it really relates to our data. So you know about ImageNet, which Feifei created. The images in ImageNet were 224 pixels by 224. If you ask DALL-E, one of these generative models, to generate a hippopotamus and a lily pond in the style of Van Gogh, you might get this image, which is 1024 by 1024. That's about the size of a single CT slice. Of course, our CTs are often dozens of images, and that's just before we inject the intravenous contrast, and then there's more images during the injection, after the injection. If this were an MRI, we might have 20 sequences instead of 3. We have to compare to the prior studies, and then we look at this data in the context of the entire medical record. So not just imaging data, but lab results, medications, text notes, and so forth. So a rich multimodal data set that we can tap into. To illustrate the value of that, I just want to show you a contrast between the size of the training data that's being used outside of medicine versus inside of medicine. So you look at the largest model, text model, about 82 billion tokens inside medicine, about 15 trillion tokens outside of medicine. This is a log scale, so it's about 100x difference here in text. Images, it's the same, 16 million versus about 6 billion images as the training data. And the size of the training data, as you know, is really thought to be one of the primary determinants of the performance of these models. Just using the data that we have here at Stanford, we can substantially close that gap. And so we are working on building these foundation models using high-quality medical data. So this is about developing foundation models across the scale of bioscience. So I showed you some imaging examples. John Etchemenny mentioned this morning the work of Nigam Shah that's doing some work on the electronic medical record, but really molecules, genes, cells, tissues, organs, patients across that scale, building foundation models. There's a large team of faculty that are working on these very problems. Just to give you a taste, this is just chest x-rays. So we trained a model on 6 million chest x-rays. And the red bars here, this is accuracy on the y-axis and various evaluation methods on the x-axis. And you can see when you start to train on large amounts of high-quality health data, you get improved accuracy versus some of the prior benchmarks. Layered on top of this is something that we call RAISE Health, Responsible AI for Safe and Equitable Healthcare. This is a joint initiative between the School of Medicine and HI. And it's designed to make sure that we responsibly evaluate these technologies before we implement them. We make sure that the ethical issues are managed as well. We make sure that the fairness issues, that these models provide good answers for all the groups of patients to which they're applied. So we're really excited about, again, responsible AI across the board. So I think we're on the threshold of some really key medical breakthroughs driven by AI, and I hope I've given you a sense of why we're so excited about the work that we're doing in healthcare. Thank you.
Please join me, Curt.
I shall.
So if there's a familiarity that you sense between Curt and me, it's because we met 41 years ago as first-year medical students, so we've been around the block. So thank you for the vision. So many questions, but let's just start with, what about winning patient trust? I think in many other spheres, users and customers and participants are worried about whether the AI that's being used is fair to them and is reliable. What do you do when you're talking to patients about how AI is helping their care?
Yeah. Well, I think we've been fortunate in medicine in that we have used AI for some time, not the newest generation of AI, but rule-based systems to look at drug-drug interactions and drug allergy alerts and those kinds of things. So in some sense, we're comfortable with that in the ecosystem. I think some of the we're also fortunate that we're a regulated industry. So we have the FDA and other agencies to make sure that these technologies are safe and effective. So we've had now, I think, 800 machine learning algorithms approximately cleared by the FDA through their process. I think that's very important. I think more recently, some of the activity and discussion around AGI and those kinds of things outside of medicine has filtered over into the medical world. What can we do about it? I think we need to be very careful to be mindful of the privacy of patients as we aggregate the data that we use to train these systems. I also think it's really important for us to include patients in the design process. So that coronary calcium algorithm I mentioned, for example, was a large interdisciplinary team, cardiologists, radiologists, computer scientists, but we also had a patient on the team who was really instrumental in helping us design the communications that we were going to provide back to those patients. And I guess the other thing I would say is that as patients learn about what we're actually doing, I don't want to build AGI, I want to build ASI, like artificial specific intelligence using healthcare, high quality healthcare data to answer the question of, what's on this CT of the chest, not can you recommend the restaurants in Minneapolis or, something else. So we're really focused on that.
I was also struck in your example of the explain this MRI to me. Those kinds of experiences, I think, will win the trust of patients as well, because they'll see that we're using this to help their understanding, to help their engagement in the whole process, and hopefully that gives some credibility to the greater enterprise.
It is, and I think when patients engage with their own health information, that leads to better health. They're often the best able to look at it and analyze it as they can understand it.
Just turning topics a little bit, we know that a lot of the large language models and AI in general is not always right. Some people call them hallucinations and accuracy issues. Medicine is one of these high-stakes decision-making situations. There are others, like flying your airplane, where you don't want to make a mistake. How, as you and your colleagues are building these systems, how do you make sure that the accuracy and the so-called hallucinations are controlled, identified, that they don't do damage?
Yeah. Well, so when we build these foundation models, we really think of that as something that will benefit downstream. So it's going to improve the accuracy of that downstream model. It's going to reduce the need for training data, which is very expensive for us to produce. And so we would want to evaluate each of those downstream models for its specific use case in that way. Now, there are some ways in which we use these large language models generally that I think, where your question I think is very relevant. So one of the ways is that we would, for example, use it to summarize the medical record. So if I'm a radiologist, I might read 100 cases in a morning, 100 chest x-rays. To know those patients very well is a challenge. And so if we could have a brief summary of that patient, I think that would be very relevant. Now, that's an area where I think there may be some difficulties with those hallucinations, because I, as a human in the loop, can't really double check the summary of that chart unless I myself go through the whole chart. But another way we use these language models I think is really helpful is, for example, to draft the text of the report based on the image. In that case, I have looked at the image. I know what should be in that report. So I can easily look through that and proof it and serve as a check on the possibility of hallucination. So I think it depends to some extent on how we use them.
We only have a short amount of time, but I have to ask this because radiologists were one of the groups that people were saying would be threatened by AI. And so I wanted to ask you, and I also know you have a leadership position in some big radiology organizations. What is the temperature of the everyday radiologist these days and AI?
I think that's a great question. Max anxiety was probably 2016, 2017, when a lot of these comments were made that, I'm more likely to be replaced than my administrative assistant, or we should stop training radiologists now, these kinds of things. But I think that the more radiologists get exposed to these tools, first of all, they feel much more comfortable because they realize that, for one thing, when you see the headline that an AI algorithm can detect pneumonia at the level of a radiologist, well, we trained to recognize 200 things on a chest X-ray, not one thing. So that's not really our job. And the second thing I think we realize is that the human perception system and these machines, they are good at finding different kinds of things. So the two together, the combination of the machine and the human, is likely to have a better accuracy than either one alone, because we can each kind of find some of the things that others might miss. So I think that's been comforting.
There you have it, augmentation. Thank you very much, Curt Langlotz.
Thank you, Russ. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Next, I'd like to introduce our next lightning speaker, Patti Maas. She's the Jamishausen Professor of Media Arts and Sciences at the MIT Media Lab.
"35 years ago, I decided, or I finished my PhD in artificial intelligence in Belgium and decided to head for MIT to join the AI lab because, of course, then as well as now, Stanford and MIT were sort of the two places you wanted to be if you wanted to be at the center of it all for AI research. But after sort of working there for a little while, working on learning robots, etc., I became a little bit disillusioned with this whole goal of artificial intelligence, because the goal back then, and still pretty much now, is to surpass or match or surpass human intelligence rather than helping people with becoming maybe more intelligent themselves. So I decided to move to the Media Lab because I felt that place was more human-centered than the engineers at the AI lab at MIT, and started a program of research in intelligence augmentation with the goal of optimizing human performance and well-being with the same types of tools. So the question that I've been asking for all those years is, can AI techniques support us in becoming the person that we all want to be? Can AI support skills that prevent us from reaching our potential? Things like attention, lack of attention rather, memory decline for the elderly, ability to think critically, to talk and communicate effectively, to change behaviors that may not be so productive, etc. So I'm especially interested not so much in AI as a productivity tool, a tool that can help people become more productive, but how can it help us with these hard issues that many people struggle with? For example, a lot of our work is focused on the elderly. By 2030, 1 in 6 people in the world will be over 60 years old and suffering from some form of cognitive decline. Memory becoming worse, processing speeds, etc., becoming less good, etc. So we've been building systems that can help people still basically live independently and safely in their homes, despite maybe some early cognitive decline. For example, MemPal is a system that we recently co-designed with people 75 to 94 years old and tested in their own homes. It is an AI system that you wear around your neck, a camera basically, and a phone. And it continuously takes pictures of what you are doing with your hands, because it turns out that your hands are a good indication of what activities, of the activities that you're doing and are engaged in. So this system constantly sees your hands, notices when you put your bracelet on the counter, when you put something else somewhere else, when you turn the stove on, take your medicine, etc. And the system doesn't keep these pictures because we try to protect privacy, but instead it turns that into a very detailed log of what the person is doing all day. She made breakfast. There's higher level activities that are recognized, like making breakfast, eating breakfast, etc., as well as all the little steps that are involved, like taking the butter out of the fridge, etc. So the system can then assist the person when you misplace something.
Hi, pal, where is my phone?
So we can't hear what she's hearing, but we use bone conduction speaker that doesn't block your hearing to tell her where the phone is located. So you can support things like that, finding misplaced objects, but we also prevent repeated actions. You can say, did I take my medication already today? Or you can get context-based reminders, safety reminders, like you turned on the stove, but you didn't turn it off again, or it's after 8 p.m. and you didn't lock the door, etc. It also reduces caregiver burden or stress, because caregivers can get a summary of the activities of the person they care about, whether that is that they've had regular meals, etc. And this could even be used, these summaries could even be used for doctors to let the doctor sort of keep abreast or have them be abreast of what the memory issues are that this person is struggling with, and so on. But if you think that developing technology for the elderly is not all that sexy, in fact, I would say very few people in the Silicon Valley era seem to be developing this type of technology, I would argue that these technologies are also of value for people that don't suffer memory or cognitive decline. For example, we built another system that is not based on video, but that is actually based on speech alone. And it's basically your own personal agent that records everything you say, and also, if you have the permission, things that other people that you're speaking with say. And it can help you with just-in-time reminders if your own memory is not, has a lapse. Here's a little video.
Memoro is an audio-based wearable memory assistant powered by an AI agent. It runs on unobtrusive, commercially available hardware.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Robert. I'm an investment banker from True Investments.
Oh, and what do you do there?
So we invest in biotech startups that help with rare diseases.
Oh wait, what was his name again?
Robert.
So we're a biotech startup.
You know why we look for investment?
Oh yes, I actually just met this guy last week. His name is Robert, and he works in Fluid Investments, and they specialize in
rare diseases.
Biotech startups working in rare diseases.
So you get the idea. We try to give you this minimal input in a non-disruptive way. We minimize rather than giving you long responses like chat systems today. We give you just the information you need, trained on your own data of all of the conversations you've had. And we can talk about privacy later if you prefer. So one other area, of course, where a lot of people struggle, and maybe it's more younger people, is critical thinking. We're all bombarded by information that is highly persuasive. And so for a while now, we've been building systems that try to help people think more critically about information they read or hear. And we built a system that constantly sort of gives you advice and says, whatever this person said is not true or is logically invalid, etc. And we realized that this will affect people's decision making if the system provides explanations as well for its recommendations. So that's a good thing. But then we thought, well, what if you have a malicious AI that gives you real-time input in your decision-making, telling you something is true or false, and here's why. And we did another experiment looking at 1,000 newspaper headlines, and people had to decide, are they true or false? And what we realized was that people overly rely on the advice, the real-time advice of this AI system, and that if the AI system is malicious, trying to convince you of the opposite of what is the truth, the accuracy levels of people reduce to half where they are normally if they're not assisted by AI. I think it is incredibly important that we study basically AI working with people, not just AI by itself and then dropping it into people's hands, because there are a lot of risks involved in how people are responding to these systems. We learned that it's actually important that an AI engages the person first in thinking about the problem before giving its recommendation to the person, and that actually results in better performance. So we need to optimize the behavior of combined human and AI systems, because there's a lot of unintended consequences, like people stop their critical thinking, when they are assisted by a very conversational AI, because you just assume that it's right and your performance can go down. Now, attitude and behavior change, another one of those problems that people struggle with and that prevents them from realizing their potential. We think that AI has a lot of potential there as well. Just today, The Guardian published an article on our work. It's a project called Future You, and it's designed for people 30 or under. And basically, what we do is you upload a picture, you give some information about your life's goals, and we create a possible future self. Of course, we tell you this is not destiny, this is just one potential self. You can change that. But then we create these synthetic memories for that future self as well, so that you can have a conversation with your future self. So you can say, I think I want to become a biology teacher in an inner city, and I want to get married and have 2 kids, and I would love to have a house. And then you can talk to this future self and ask it, well, what is it like to be a biology teacher while you have 2 kids, and so on. And because there is so much rich information available in these models, that those answers from this future self can be really revealing. And we just, published a whole, we didn't publish it, we submitted it, it's also on archive, a whole study with 344 participants that shows that people who interact like this with their older self are more future-oriented, have less anxiety about the future, etc. And so it really helps these young people do things like think about saving money, trying to study hard, improve their other behaviors like diet, etc. We've done work as well, continuing this work in helping people talk to other synthetic characters to rehearse conversations. We built a system where you can actually create a synthetic version of your boss, your parent, your partner. You have to give some information about them, of course, and you can then practice hard conversations with this synthetic version of the other person. So I'll be happy to send you the paper, or you can look it up on our website as well. But you can basically either direct 2 characters in this conversation, like a theater director, or you can be a first-person participant and learn to rehearse a hard conversation, like asking for money or telling your boss that they're full of whatever. AI is here to stay this time. That is clear, I think. But I would like to encourage all of you, and especially the young people in the room, to design and use it to augment and support rather than replace people, and to really develop new digital AI-based tools for people that can help them with reaching their potential and getting the best life they could have. Thank you.
Thank you for that really fascinating talk, Pati, and also thank you for intelligence automation. Now, forgive me, I couldn't resist. So you made an allusion to, and I wanted to go right to the privacy issues, particularly for the elderly applications, but really for all the applications. Mm-hmm. You're getting a lot of data about people that's being used to make decisions about them, sometimes for them. How do you approach privacy and especially consent?
Yes. So I view all of these systems as tools that you can choose, you opt into using them the way people today go to a coach or a therapist, or maybe they take some drugs in the hope that it will improve their memory or behavior or attention span or whatever. These are new types of tools that I want to give people access to. And we always try to the extent possible, make all the data be local and the processing be local. For example, with the elderly, we heard it from them as well. We've been doing these co-design workshops with the elderly, and privacy was their number one concern, actually. And then they love the idea, of course, that these systems can make them more independent because they hate being treated as someone who's not capable, etc. But yeah, I believe that you can run these things locally, or we will soon definitely be able to run all of these types of things locally so that the person themselves can decide what information, say, their caregivers have access to, their doctor has access to, and so on.
Really interesting. Another issue that occurred to me while you were speaking was this kind of access justice issue. We all know that a lot of these great new things often become available to the more privileged folks, mm-hmm. and especially, and you made a very good point about how you don't want this to be thought of simply as a productivity improver, but to kind of, there's still always this possibility, and I know some of these have not rolled out into products yet, but as you design them, are you thinking about these issues about how to make sure that they get into the hands in a fair and equitable way?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons that I went into computer science, and one of the reasons why I feel good about having made that choice, is that ultimately, I think digital systems really have a democratizing force, sort of, or they can make opportunities more equally accessible and available to everybody out there. A phone, all you need is a phone or a laptop or whatever, and you have the same abilities, the same access to things as people that were born in a better family, in a richer country, etc. Mm-hmm.
Do you see? Do you have a time frame for when these things might actually become products? I know people are always thinking, is this way far out, or are we very close to having this on the shelves?
No, I don't think this is that far out. Although I'm always an optimist, and too much of an optimist. I've learned my lesson there. But I think all of this is very much possible, and I think we should try to develop more of these systems that really help people, support people in their daily lives, rather than always, computer science is still thinking of itself as being about productivity, but we use our phones and our laptops mostly for other stuff. If you look at, Andreessen Horowitz did a study of engagement per category of AI, these newest AI systems. Well, companionship, people talking to AI agents for companionship, is like 20 times as much engagement as ChatGPT and Bing, etc. So we have to stop thinking about computers as productivity tools. They are live tools, and they can help us with all of these tough issues, like maybe loneliness, etc., that many people are struggling with.
So you, one of the last examples, very fascinating, was the critical thinking tutors, helpers. I can't remember how you describe them, but obviously in this period of fake news and disinformation, that becomes, and I'm sure you knew this when you took on the research project, that becomes incredibly salient in society. So can you tell us more about the motivations for that and the use cases that you imagine? Are we going to have a whole generation who will need to learn this, or maybe a generation that needs to relearn it? Tell me about how that project came up.
So I am very worried that current AI systems, being language-based and being so eloquent and persuasive, that they are actually too persuasive for their own good. And that people basically stop thinking for themselves, but there's also a risk of de-skilling, of people losing certain skills because they become too reliant, too dependent on these systems. So it's really critical that we study this in a real context and see what happens. And there's not enough of that going on. Systems are being created by companies and then they just dump them rather than doing some studies of what the effects of these systems are on people's thinking and decision making and so on. And we need to come up with better interfaces, different interfaces that aren't just sort of question, answer, and you get this long answer and it seems very believable. And so, yeah, that must be true. So yeah, there's really a lot of work needed in in really understanding the interaction between people and AI systems and designing that so that ultimately you get the intended effects.
It's a fascinating step. So thank you very much, and thank you to Pati Mas.
Thank you.
The final lightning speaker is Melissa Valentine. She's a professor of management science and engineering, co-director of the Science of Work, Technology, and Organization, WTO, at Stanford University. Thank you, Melissa.
All right, good afternoon. So we're here today talking about and celebrating innovative technologies and their impact. So for my part, I'm very excited to talk to you about a cutting-edge technology. I would say one of the most impactful technologies of the last 2 centuries. It is the org chart. So you may think that I'm joking, but hear me out. I would say that the organizational chart is, in fact, it is a human invention, it is human creativity, it is human innovation. And it has enabled us to solve problems more powerfully than we could do alone. So let's think about organizations. Organizations are everywhere. I'm guessing you were born in an organization. Probably you had an organization register your birth. You probably went to school in an organization. You were trained in an organization. You were credentialed in an organization. Likely you work in an organization. You may have started an organization. Very likely you get most of your food through organizations. So organizations are everywhere. Most of what we do in this society is accomplished in and through organizations. And it was not that way before the Industrial Revolution. This is a new invention, relatively speaking, and it makes us more powerful as a society. As a society, some of our greatest accomplishments, I would say all of our greatest accomplishments, come together. They come as we specialize, and then as we coordinate our specialized efforts. So to continue to convince you that organizations are worth our attention right now, here are 3 Nobel Prizes that were awarded for thinking about organizations. What I'm showing you here is organizations are important and they're complex. It took a lot of thinking for us to understand what organizations are and how they work, as evidenced by these important Nobel Prizes. So some of our greatest accomplishments as a society come as we specialize and as we coordinate. And I think at this moment, when we're thinking about and kind of taking stock of the moment in AI, it's important, I think, to bring organizations back into the conversation. I think that we've become sort of overly fixated on this image of an individual job and an individual job being lost. But most of our power comes as we work together, as we coordinate across all of our jobs. And these jobs will change. Tasks will be automated, but it's going to happen in organizations. That's where we're going to figure this out. That's where we're going to figure out the future of work, the future of jobs is in organizations. So my discipline is called organization science. And as I was showing you, it has produced Nobel Prize-worthy insight. So it is actually complicated to think about what organizations are and how they work. So as a citizen of a modern society, this looks simple to you. You know a lot about how organizations work. You've worked in them, you've used them, maybe you've designed your own organizations. But these are powerful ideas that we're going to use. We're going to change these using AI, and I'm going to show you how organizations can become more powerful as we use AI. So what do organizations do? You already know this. This is Organization Science 101, but let's talk about it. So organizations divide up decisions. There are limits to human cognition. There are limits to human processing, so we divide up decisions so that we can all specialize. Organizations also structure information flow. So the sort of stylized image of it is you have all of these people who are looking at different problems. They're specialized in what they're looking at. That information flows up to someone who has a vantage point over everything. That person can make decisions, or probably that team can make decisions, and then kind of send down directive interventions on what the collective will do together. Organizations also create something that economists famously called coordinated adaptation. And all that means is you have a collective of people, specialized, coordinating, who respond to change. Something in the environment changes, a new market, a new technology, and then the coordinated adaptation means that everyone kind of changes together. And that is an amazing accomplishment. It's an amazing thing that the human collective can be so responsive to change. And organizations are a part of that. So as I said, my discipline is organization science. One of my main collaborators is a computer scientist who's named Michael Bernstein. Michael is watching this from France right now, so hello to Michael. So Michael and I have done many studies together where we have looked at how AI can enhance these functions of organizations. So I'm going to tell you about 3 studies that we did that show how AI can augment organizations themselves. So I said the first thing that organizations do is they divide up decisions. So I'm telling you here, I'm visualizing a study that we did of a retail technology company. And data scientists created a cutting-edge new algorithm for the frontline workers. As the frontline workers started to use the algorithm, they saw that it explored their small decision space well. It helped them kind of think about the decisions they were making in their individual jobs. But the more that they used it, the more that they saw that the algorithm could actually explore a larger space and make better decisions. So the individual jobs were constraining the algorithm. It was constraining it to look in a smaller space. Some of the people who worked at the company said things like, we saw the algorithm could search a larger space for better results. Segmenting our teams in this way doesn't allow for our algorithms to explore scenarios in a more multidimensional way. So instead of having divided up decisions that help human brains, what if we had AI-augmented organizations? The way that this company ended up evolving over time is they thought about, this is complicated stuff, over time they are thinking of creating an algorithmic decision engine at the center of the organization. So the algorithm can explore a larger space. It can model many different ways of making the decisions. It can model many different ways of dividing up the decisions. And alongside it, you still need humans. So the humans need to interact with the algorithmic engine that is making recommending all of these decisions, because there are trade-offs that get surfaced, there's strategy that needs to be created, and there's curation and sort of checking and repair of the algorithm. So side by side, we have an algorithmic decision engine, but you still need the org chart. Together, they are more powerful. Second, I told you organizations structure information flow. So in this case, I'm showing you a study that we did with Dr. Sharon Zhu. She created an algorithm that basically figured out how to experiment and optimize on this, I called it directive intervention. So this system, we made it in Slack. We called it the coordination bot. So what it did is it collected data from the teams based on what was happening with the teams, their satisfaction, the performance of the team. Then coordination bot would recommend different kinds of team structures that the teams could experiment with. So over time, so you see the information flow up, and then you see the directive intervention coming from the coordination bot. So what does that allow? So what we saw is that coordination bot would experiment more, and it could become optimized, so it was experimenting in sort of a more optimal way instead of overwhelming the teams with experimentation. So you have AI to help assess the situation. There's different kinds of data, there's different kinds of analyses that you can make use of that feed up to something, a manager with a bot with an AI of some sort, and then different kinds of optimizing and experimenting with these directive interventions that will help them sort of explore over time. And then finally, the third example, so I was talking about this phrase, coordinated adaptation, and it's a remarkable human feat that we can create collectives that respond and adapt to change. One way that that happens is you'll have some sort of leader, you'll have someone who has a goal, who recognizes the opportunity to sort of bring a collective together and respond to the goal. So what that involves is recognizing needed expertise, convening the needed experts, structuring their work together to help them adapt to whatever's happening. So we used AI at these different places. We used AI to find the experts. We used different crowdsourcing techniques that allowed us to look into online labor markets where there are many more experts available. So you could sort of crowdsource. Let's say you recognize the need for someone who's an expert in AI or data science. Using AI and sort of crowdsourcing techniques, you can find those people, bring them online more rapidly. And then the second technology that made this work is we made our organizational chart much more adaptive. So it would be editable by anyone on the team. We basically just used a pull request model, so someone could edit the org chart and then it would update across for everyone to see. So all of these AI-augmented organizations, I hope you can see that they can help us solve problems better. I don't think that the era of human work is done. I think we can solve more problems better when our organizations are augmented, when we're able to make better decisions, and still bring our experts and humans in the work to do things like collaborate, strategize, like recognize the trade-offs, make trade-offs. My final comment on organizations and organizational design, as we're here sort of celebrating HAI, I wanted to say that I had the opportunity to sort of watch Feifei and Etch when they were designing HAI, and they didn't have to do it as well as they did. They made it interdisciplinary, they made it broad-minded, they brought in artists, social scientists, policymakers from the start. So it's just an example of how organizational design is powerful, and when you do it right, you can get more people in the room helping out with important problems. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was great. And so many things that I want to ask, but let's just start off. Your examples are great because they're intentional kind of uses of AI to make the organization better, faster, stronger. Mm-hmm. My first question is, if an organization is not paying attention to AI and is not using these tools, but there is ground-up use, and I think that's happening ubiquitously, mm-hmm. Does it threaten organizations, or is it just another example of kind of little things that have happened that the organizations will have to adapt to? I'm wondering if AI is an existential threat to organizations who don't positively embrace it. Mm.
I mean, I hear two different questions here. I think the first is in terms of how people are adopting AI in organizations right now. And I think what I'm seeing much more of right now with Gen AI in particular is experimentation. I think we don't know how to use it well in organizations yet. I think that there's much more kind of bottoms up. People are like in their individual workflows figuring out how to use it. I have seen powerful examples, though, where the Gen AI does start to look like it's doing more coordination work. So just as an example, software engineers out there will know the word API. It's just like a line of code that connects two different pieces of software. So I started seeing examples where people were automating the creation of like APIs that are connecting different parts of the organization. So AI is starting to do more help. So Gen AI in particular is starting to do more helpful coordination work. And I think that's important to pay attention to. I don't think so I don't know, we were talking backstage, like, do we want to be on record, like saying anything at this point? And so I do feel kind of like on record saying that I think human organizations are important and powerful. I think together specialization and coordination is powerful. So I don't think that organizations themselves, I mean, I think today's business models, today's organizational structures will change in pretty profound ways, but I don't think we're done with human work, human coordination, human organizations.
The next, you said this, and it was remarkable to me. You said, I think this is almost a quote, an organization can become more powerful as we use AI. And that can be taken in two ways. That can be great for the organization, but we can imagine organizations whose power we need to modulate. So talk to me about the many facets of that statement. Please.
Thank you for picking up on that, because as I was saying that, I was like, I need you all to know that I, of course, recognize that organizations can be so ineffective and frustrating. I think there are examples where organizations help us solve problems in really powerful ways. Good for us, and that's great. And there are so many risks to it, as you're describing. My impression is that this is a moment where we need like many new policies around organizations. Organizations are like the social building block of our society, of our economy. We need many more policies to think about what happens, just for example, with like the flash teams, if people are sort of more, dynamically sort of joining projects, what happens to things like, I don't know, like in the US, everything is organized around organizations, healthcare, retirement, mentorship. Just like, what does the ecosystem of work look like if people are more dynamically in and out of organizations? For example, I think bigger ones are like data privacy, data policy, cybersecurity. I think policy issues are needed. Organizations are a tool, just like AI is a tool, but then we as a society have to figure out how we're using those tools well.
Much like how I asked Curt about the response of patients to AI. I think you and I were both at a talk this week, forgive me if I'm wrong, but where the speaker brought up the idea that in the future there might be a manager who delegates part of their management duties to a bot, to an AI agent how will it feel to those employees to know that even though they have a manager, that manager has delegated part or all of the management of that employee to an AI system. And that raises the issue of the human-computer interaction issues. Does that come up in your work, and how do you think about that in terms of there's a difference between the exact same decision being delivered to me by a human versus by an AI?
Oh yeah, for sure. So I would say, our research tends to be a little bit more on sort of like the decision structures that are happening, but we've written some papers. So for example, there's a review paper that I did that was looking at all of the research where you have algorithmic management. People don't like it. People want, and part of the issue is when something matters so much, like getting hired or getting your job or like, getting fired, like you want recourse. Right. It's like when you call an airline and it's like the worst experience because you cannot get a human on the phone. Like imagine that that's how your job works. Like that's not a good situation. Right. Yeah. So people want recourse. They want empathy. Humans are good. I mean, like every time I say something like this, like I imagine an engineer being like, but you could make a bot have empathy. Generally, people don't like algorithmic management.
Yes, yeah. So I used the word rage and fury about my initial sense of how I would respond to my chairman saying, I'm your chairperson, but I would like you to please deal with this bot because I'm busy this week.
Yeah. Mary Gray and Sid have a book called Ghost Work, and they coined the term algorithmic cruelty. So if somebody is like very impacted by an automated system and they cannot get recourse, they call it algorithmic cruelty.
I'm sorry to end a session on augmentation with this very dark, but thank you very much.
Of course, yeah. Thank you.